following is intended to provoke thought and challenge our assumptions. The opinions we hold are subject to change based on new and valid information. Your discretion is advised.
Yeah. This does fit pretty well with our topic, self-awareness.
Self-awareness, yeah.
Yeah, that the guy, I think the best way, and you probably have already gone this route, is just talking to him about how what he's doing is selfish, and affecting other people, and it really is a solution. And for whatever reason,
like the screen's an easy one.
Exactly.
That's like, that doesn't infringe on anyone's freedom, including the dog's.
Mm-hmm. And then with the dog, I don't know. I mean, it's really not. I knew a lot of people that put their dogs in cages at night, and actually, for some dogs, it helps with anxiety.
It does,
especially in the middle of the night. Like why bother really letting him loose? I mean, what is he benefiting exactly from free reign at night?
Right. Yeah, my parents did that with our dog, and she liked her cage. Like, don't get me wrong, she wouldn't just like willfully go in there, but when we're like, okay, it's time for bed, she'd be like, all right.
Yeah.
And then she would never shit in her cage, piss in her cage, because you don't shit where you do that.
Yeah.
But we got to figure something out, because like at the end of the day, he's got to live his life too. Like, yeah. I realize that.
Right, and then he has the right to do what he wills, but I mean, again, to be a responsible citizen or just a considerate person, you make sure what you're willing is not imposing on somebody else's will and their desires to live a happy life.
Yeah, it's just, that's so tough, man.
Yeah, because it's one of those things that like there are certain things that people will do or like are willing to do, but I don't know. Like for me, like putting Benny in a cage as a permanent stop to like do that, that'd be like a last resort.
Yeah. Versus
like I might get some rugs and then just have like,
I suggested a rug.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's like, that's the thing, I already got one. I'm like, I bet it's cheap as fuck though.
Yeah.
And like it's at the point where we're looking at insulating the ceiling. That's gonna cost like thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. So we'll probably do that anyway as a way to secure the rent in the future. So that way renters don't have to have the same issue. Because that would be a pretty shitty thing to like have a rental property and then you got tenants like complaining to you about the upstairs unit being too loud. Like that shouldn't fly.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I also don't think you would allow Benny to be like running back and forth in the middle of the night.
Not if I had people that were here.
That were below you, yeah.
Yeah. Like if it's just me, or it is just me and just garages
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Right. And plus, Benny's also tiny.
Yeah.
And he probably doesn't make any noise on this. Like, this is carpeted.
Yeah.
Very thick.
Yeah. But, like, those little things. Like, I would think about those things before getting, the dog or doing things like that. Like, for example, I'm looking at apartments, and, like, one of the things I'm like, really trying to avoid is, like, living and sharing walls with people. Because, like, I don't want to deal with their shit, and I don't want them to deal with my shit. Because, like, I'll play music real loud. I'll have people, like, over late. And, like, if I'm here on a Wednesday laughing and, like, talking to people, and then they have to get up for work at 4:30 on a Thursday, like, I would just feel bad every Wednesday. Like, but at the same time, I'm not going to not do that.
So that's interesting, because you're essentially saying that you're aware, you're proactively considering other people's perspectives.
I'm proactively trying to minimize the amount of shit that I have to answer for later.
Yeah.
So like by getting an apartment that doesn't share a wall, like I don't have to worry about it. Versus like, maybe I'll just be quiet, and then later on I'm like, that's not in my nature.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah.
I shouldn't have banked that I was gonna change the way I like to live.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think it says about, okay, so this person in particular, I think they approach it as, I'm going to do what I do, not thinking about others. And then when I realize something happens, I feel bad about it. Mm-hmm. Like,
and you apologize to smooth it over. And that works at first, because an apology usually means that you're acknowledging that you're doing something that is not cool. It's affecting other people in a negative way. So the only purpose of saying sorry is I'm acknowledging what I'm doing is not cool with you, and I'm going to change that. Otherwise, why would you say sorry?
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. So it's interesting, like with perception, just because you're aware of yourself doesn't mean you actually do anything to change it.
Yeah, it comes down to intention.
Yeah.
I think I really do. Intention means something. I mean, you can mean well and then act in an opposite way, and then that's selfish behavior, but you're aware that it's selfish. So is that truly awareness? I mean, are you your intentions or are you your actions? Because that's what other people see. People don't know your intentions. So you might mean well but be a dick and then feel bad about it later and maybe even apologize.
Yeah.
But yeah, what does that accomplish?
Yeah, it's almost like awareness is just like one piece of everything. Like he's like, my neighbor's aware, but I'm not seeing like, oh, let me get on that mesh thing.
Yeah. Well, he's also kind of what Freddy was saying about being considerate. Like, you could be aware that you're being a dick, and then even kind of know certain behaviors that could.
Right.
Like, you know, if I smoked a lot, like, I'd be like, all right, well, let me find places where I can smoke where it doesn't bother anyone. Or like when I used to smoke, like, I wouldn't do it like near people.
Yeah, just like
yeah,
Right in your face.
yeah. Or like in Japan, like, it's frowned upon to smoke and walk at the same time because like like, they don't care if you smoke.
Yeah.
But then if you're walking, then those people walking around you don't have a choice but to be in your cloud. Versus if I was stationary, then they can choose to walk around me.
Yeah, yeah.
Or like, you know, kind of avoid that.
Yeah, it's very considerate
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah. And I didn't know that. So when I was over there, I was like, ha ha ha. I'm gonna go for a smoke and a walk.
They're like, oh, there's those Filipinos again.
And like, oh, there's that dark Mexican guy back at it again.
the Japanese version of like, they're looking at you as Mexican.
Yeah.
Or whatever, you know, whatever the thing is. That's hilarious. I'm gonna take out my batteries, so I'm gonna be quiet for a minute. But
Right.
yeah, that's tough, man. Like, how have you gone about identifying? How do you go about bridging that gap between someone else's perception and your own? How have you done that?
Well, it's kind of like it's almost like a meta awareness where you're trying to be aware of the way that your actions are affecting their awareness in a way. And so it's kind of like, if you really want to be aware of yourself in a social situation, you have to kind of almost, or at least I feel, maybe not think of the other as yourself, but since you're interacting with them, you're imbuing your perceptions, your thoughts and desires upon them, and then you have to kind of predict how they're going to respond. So you're kind of aware of your own awareness and how that might affect somebody else's behavior. So it's kind of a two-way street. And if you're both really being aware of your feelings, you're less likely to interrupt, you're considerate. I think considerate behavior goes hand in hand with self-awareness. If you're self-aware, you're more considerate.
So hold on. Let me see if I understand what you're saying. So you got to be aware of your own awareness so that you can aware
Of their awareness.
of their awareness.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Have you ever done DMT?
No. No. Okay, so I think you're right. So there's like 4 levels of perception. Maybe not levels, but layers. Layers is a better term because levels implies like a hierarchy. But there's like 4 layers. There's my perception of myself. So let's use, I think a great example is someone driving on the road. So you have a perception of yourself. Then you have a perception of someone else. So I see other drivers and I have a perception of them. Then I have a perception of how they likely view me. And then I have a perception about how society views whatever experience we're interacting with. So there's like 4 levels. So that 4th one is like, you know, I'm driving, Freddy's driving. Freddy is in the left lane driving slow. And I'm like, society says that the left lane is used for passing. So therefore, like, not only is my perception right about you, but society also views you as negative.
Okay.
So like, and I could also feel like there's a difference between how I view society and how I view you. Like maybe I know like, okay, well, society says that's for the leftist passing lane, but I also think like, okay, if you ain't driving 80, you shouldn't be there anyway. You know what I mean? Even though you're passing, like my perception is still there's a discrepancy between what I view society's like rules and my own.
So you're not approving of their going 80 in the passing lane because they're not, I mean, they're passing people, but they're doing it in sort of a selfish manner?
Or like, for example, I'm driving, right? And I see you going 70 in the fast lane, but you're going slower than me.
Right.
So I see you, and I'll get into like some other levels of this. I see you as a dumbass. Like, right? That's a common, like, you dumbass.
I
like
love
that's
that trope.
yeah, right? Like, I'm driving. I think I'm a good driver, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing correctly. You're the dumbass. I think you are looking at me like some like person who's going too fast. But I think you're stupid for thinking that. So I'm already imbuing that upon you. And even though I think society says, okay, well, he's technically passing, he's not passing me. I'm passing him, so he needs to get out of the way. So there's like that 4 layers, and that level, that 4 layers, and that analysis happens like in a split second.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in that like specific example, right? So like if I'm driving behind, if I'm going 80 on cruise control.
So get closer to the mic if you can.
About a fist away.
Yeah.
If I'm like on cruise control on 80 and I see someone else behind me that's like zooming up, like if I can move, then I'll move.
Yeah.
Maybe, depending on my mood. But it's also one of those things that like I'm already going 80. Like if you want to go 95, that's on you. Now you gotta mold this situation so you can keep doing the thing that you want to do. Because like I'm already on 80 and I'm on cruise control.
So you have that. So you have your own 4 layers of perception, and now you have the person coming up behind you who also is operating with 4 layers of perception.
Right.
And so the more discrepancies between your individual 4 layers, the more likely there's going to be conflict and disagreement. And then you moderate or mediate that on your ability to communicate the discrepancies. So let's say you have some discrepancies. The worse of a communicator you are in resolving that, like the higher likelihood your conflict's going to escalate stupidly. You know, like so you already have like this initial stage for conflict, and then based on how able you are to communicate, and let's assume you both speak English. Right, so you already have a language barrier that's possible. If you're a poor communicator, like you just increase the likelihood of having disagreements. Which is also why, like, if you drive through like the UCSD area, that driving is probably one of the craziest areas in San Diego. And why? And I was thinking about it. It's because you have so many people from so many different parts of the world concentrated in that one area. You have students who have been driving for like a couple years. You have foreigners who are coming from China, India, Bangladesh, Uruguay, like all over, who have come from different driving
So they have different
cultures.
societal impressions on what to be. Yeah, being aware of societies.
Yeah. And I don't know how stringent you're aware of like driving criteria is coming from another country. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
To obtain a car and get a license. I remember I had this guy when I was going to school during a national exchange here in California. This guy, he was from Beijing. We became good friends, but he was the most terrifying driver because he's never driven before. He bought a car, they gave him a license, and we were going through LA, and he merged onto the freeway going 30 miles an hour.
Oh, God.
And it freaked me the fuck out. So you multiply his experience amongst thousands of students at UCSD, and you see like where the perceptual differences start, and then now we complicate it with language barriers.
Right.
Yeah.
You've got so many different kinds of people, and I'll touch on the idea. I mean, it's a university, so you've got kind of a specific type of person going to university. They're very about themselves and their own future, and they might be late for class, or they might have a girlfriend or I mean, something, it's all new to them. So therefore, they're really wrapped up in their own ideas and heads, and they're not really following those layers of awareness.
Yeah. How do you become aware of that? Yeah. Yeah. And I like the driving example because it's like a perfect example of how limited we are in understanding the perception of another person and doing something to resolve the discrepancy. Mm-hmm. Driving is such a great example of our inability to understand other people in very short, brief circumstances and interactions. Okay. I'm going to add 2 more things to it, and then we'll like dive deeper into it. So with perception, there's these 2 kind of like common tropes. And then there's like another thing that we can get into later, but which is like bias. There's something called the introspection illusion and naive realism, which means, and this plays into the 4 levels of layers of perception. I have an illusion that my introspection is more heavily weighted than is aligned with reality. So my naive realism tells me that my introspection is more valuable than information that disagrees with it externally. So oftentimes people overweigh their analysis of a situation as being the right way, and they explain their reality through that introspection. But when you introspect, you're not actually, the act of introspection does not increase your awareness of the situation. It typically only validates you. People don't do that meta introspection. They just introspect and then they like assume that that's. So if I'm driving, how am I more weighting my introspection? And it's more top down. So when I'm thinking about myself, it's top down. I'm a good driver. Mm-hmm. You did something stupid, which was like cut me off. Therefore, you're a dick.
Right. Yeah.
As opposed to, I cut someone off. I made a mistake. Mm-hmm. I'm not a dick. Right? So I'm like more weighting my introspection about my personal actions than I would imbue upon someone else. So for me, top down, I'm a good driver. But for you, top down, you're a piece of shit driver because you cut me off.
Yeah. Well, what I always think about with driving is that, because like I used to think about it a lot when I was in LA, and I'd be like, man, everyone is in my way. But then I realized that like, person behind me, like I'm in their way. Like when they're looking around, like, oh, like everyone is choosing to drive right now, and therefore they're idiots. I'm like, well, I'm also driving right now, so I'm also an idiot.
I love that anybody going slower than you is a dumbass, and anybody going faster is a fucking maniac.
Right. This is reckless.
Because you got a reason for driving fast, you've got a reason for driving slow, and your reason is more valid, like you're saying, than theirs.
And I want to break this away from driving, but like as we're seeing, it's such a great starting point because you can immediately understand how that then shapes into like your interactions with other people, and how we're not so far off from just still driving these autonomous human meat bodies who are miscommunicating to each other. So I don't know where to take it from there now that I've like introduced that.
I wish you'd given out like brochures or something on like the 4 layers of awareness.
I should just pass them out in the street. Just like, hey, dumbass. Hey, dumbass.
Hey, you're reckless.
Yeah, hey, you're reckless.
You're walking way too fast.
Hey, guy on the motorcycle. Go blah, 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 blah.
Chase him down or something. I need to give you this.
Yeah, take this. So you're aware.
Well, you can kind of like look at it now to bring it back to like our meat bodies, right? Okay. So like with masks. Like that's supposed to be one where like I worked in a medical field. I should be wearing a mask at all times. I typically don't. Especially like when I'm outside, when I'm at the park, everyone's wearing a mask, and I'm just like, I didn't bring one with me. Right. Because like I have no intentions of being inside. I have no intentions of being close to other people.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I have the awareness that like I'm fully vaccinated and that I'm probably not feeling ill.
Right.
So like I don't really care. But then everyone else, like, they don't know that. They're just like, this guy's never wearing a mask or a shirt. What's his problem?
Dude, I cannot picture you just going to a park and just getting up on people like Benny, just like, what up, you know, getting close to them, you know?
Yeah. I mean, especially now, But like they reopened all the parks. Like I typically would just like stand in a place and like, you know, let Benny interact. Every now and then, like we kind of venture closer to people, but like I'm not gonna stand next to someone right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're aware enough to know that you're making a decision that other people might not necessarily agree with, but you're not rubbing it in their face.
No.
I mean, kind of like smoking, you know? I mean, that's an act that, you know, society doesn't really approve of it at this point. Other people don't like it. But, I mean, it's fun to walk and smoke. I used to smoke, and when you're really caught up in your own habits, then it's hard to even really pay attention to other people and what they think about your habits or how that's affecting them.
Unless you get it done to you, right?
Yeah.
So like if you're ever like chilling at a park, like reading a book by yourself, and someone like lights up and like starts smoking next to you, like, oh, that's really invasive.
Yeah. There's the introspection illusion, right? Like the weight of my, like now that I'm aware of it, I'm heavily weighting this, you know.
But like, how do you make that for most people to go like, oh, that's really invasive. I do that shit too. So then when I'm doing that, like I'm being invasive.
I want to talk about how you do that with people, but I want to hit on the mask thing first. So I was because that's like the perfect segue and the perfect current thing that's happening still with masks that has very much highlighted different perceptions across people. So I was at a Mexican restaurant getting a burrito, and this guy was like maskless, and he tips like $10. And he goes, "Hey man, thanks for giving me a burrito and not making me wear a mask like all these other sheep. Like thanks for not making me a sheep, bro." And he didn't like say all these other people. It was more like, thanks for not making me be like other people and be like a sheep. And you know, I think the owner or whoever was working there is just like, I just don't want to deal with you personally.
Right.
So the perception. So here's where we have like that fourth layer of perception is what I believe society views it. And my definition of my society might be different than your belief of your society. So for him, he believes that society sees people as sheep who wear masks. So my circle and my level of influence views mask wearing as unnecessary and stupid. And then you weight that with his own perception of himself, that he's definitely not a sheep.
Yeah.
I mean, he's working construction, but definitely not a sheep in the pool of, you know, all the choices that you get in life. He's definitely choosing free will. He's definitely an autonomous being who's choosing not to be a sheep. And then society says, you know, like my society says, like, don't conform.
Right.
Don't do this.
Don't be a punk bitch.
And then my perception of you, if you're conforming, is what? You're a sheep.
Yeah.
And how do you view me not wearing a mask? How do I think you're viewing me? Probably combative. It's probably hostile. So the likelihood of conflict to escalate if confronted is probably pretty high.
Right.
With this individual. So what do you think about that?
I love that you brought up masks and the way that I'm gonna have a hard time using like perception and awareness in the way that you're using it, but it was a very similar thought that I had that, and back to cars, using blinkers, wearing a mask, it's a selfless act, and you might not necessarily agree with it, but you're going to keep in mind what other people think or what society, we want people to wear masks, but I'm going to make a decision to not wear it in a certain place because it doesn't fit with my ideals. But back to the sheep topic, I mean, that's almost how I feel like with using blinkers. People don't want to seem like a pushover. And that's the same like being a sheep with wearing masks. That I'm doing this for other people, and if people see me being very selfless and putting other people first, maybe they're going to take advantage of me. Or they're just going to judge me as somebody that just gives in too easily.
Yeah.
And they're going to think that I'm weak. So
you think using blinkers is like...
That's a very spiritual... It's selfless. I mean, you're not doing it for yourself. It's kind of it's something that's not necessarily easy.
You could be doing it for yourself if it's like you're trying to merge onto traffic right? And like the person behind you doesn't know what you're doing, and they're just like,
Right.
why is this person slowing down? What an idiot.
Exactly.
And then you're really slowing down or speeding up to try to like merge over. But if you don't use your blinker, then I have no idea what you're doing.
Have you ever noticed though that if you
Asians
put
can't
your
drive?
blinker on and you're kind of in front of somebody and you want to get over, sometimes they'll speed up.
Sometimes.
I don't want this dude getting in front of me.
Yeah.
So I think
Which
that
is
kind of has something.
ridiculous because you're wall to wall in cars. So like sometimes it's like it's just I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying though too, because it's like you never have to use your your blinker.
Yeah.
Although I would argue it makes things easier for you in many circumstances, like at a 4-way stop sign.
Its purpose is to make things easier.
Yeah.
Whether or not it does make things easier depends on like how much of a dick people are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how well you communicate, because like at a 4-way stop, I tell this to my wife all the time. I'm like, Holly, use your blinker at a 4-way stop. They stop, they don't see your blinker, they're gonna assume you're going straight, and then here you go, yahooing, turning left.
Yeah.
like they're looking at you like, what the hell?
Like, I didn't know using a blinker was such a controversial thing. I thought it was universal. Like we all use blinkers.
Oh man, it's such a pet peeve of mine, man. I do it religiously. Just because I want other people to do the same thing for me.
Right.
I hate it when people just suddenly zip in front of you, you know? And it's like, they wouldn't really benefit from using a blinker. They might benefit because I'm not going to honk at them. But again, it's like, I don't need a blinker in order to change lanes if I do it quickly and accurately.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm not even recognizing, or maybe I do recognize that that's kind of a dick move to the guys behind me. They don't know what I'm going to do, and suddenly I do something that's somewhat unpredictable.
Yeah. And I would say like people that would not use their blinkers would probably categorize themselves as good drivers, and that's why they don't need
100%.
to do it.
Yeah, that's a
But
great
like
point.
being a good driver means you're doing these things and keeping everyone else safe.
According to your ass.
Yeah, for sure. But then again, if you're doing things that is risky, but then you're opening yourself to more risk by like not minimizing the things that you're subjecting yourself to, then I would suggest you're not that good of a driver.
Yeah.
So at some point it'll catch up.
Yeah, so I was telling Freddy this. I'll have one of my classes where I'm teaching this perception thing, and my opening question's like, how many of you consider yourself bad drivers?
I raise my hand.
That's actually pretty self-aware, so I'm proud of you, Alvin. Because you are a terrifying driver sometimes.
I don't know. I was kind of scared driving with you too, Sanan.
I know. I was angsty.
I think I mentioned this when you told me about this. Like a recommendation would be maybe not take such a hardline stance about making people recognize that I'm a bad driver, and that's kind of a final stance too. I'm a bad driver all the time.
Yeah.
So maybe more like, who here has done something selfish on the road? Who's gone 20 miles an hour faster than other people around you?
Well, I think the idea is to like first highlight that we're very unlikely to view. No thanks.
Oh, thanks, dude.
Actually, you know what? Fuck, I'll take some coffee. Just a little bit, like a half cup.
Here, take this one. I got a mug right there.
Is there a half cup?
This is actually a half cup, yeah.
Oh, okay. We're drinking some coffee right now. Alvin graciously poured us some.
It's mushroom infused.
What kind of mushroom?
Not the fun ones.
It's not the good kind.
Okay, I mean, that's good. I don't want that experience right now.
You'd be too self-aware.
I don't think so. I think I would. But like the idea is to highlight to people that we typically don't think of ourselves as bad people.
Yeah.
And that's good. Like you want ego protection, right? Most people actually self-enhance. Some people self-diminish.
I feel like I self-diminish a lot.
Yeah, that's because you're very modest, right? I'd be like, dude, Alvin, you're so good at this. And he's like, well, I'm all right. It's very modest. It's a certain personality. Certain personalities are more likely to self-diminish than to self-inflate, but most people's tendencies are to self-inflate because you don't want to think of yourself as quote-unquote bad.
Right.
So the idea is to how can you become more aware of your flaws? Because like with the mask thing, one of the biggest reasons why it was so hard for people to interact with one another who had different views is because society came in and said, dude, everybody's wearing masks. So there was a huge portion of the population who just connected, if you wear a mask, society says we're saving lives, we're doing all these things, therefore if you're not, I have a huge gamut of reasons why you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And then it really quickly, we talked about this, became tied to conservatives and pro-Trump. Like, what does it say about you for not wearing a mask? And the reasons can be way more complicated, but for the most part, we simplified them into pro-Trump, arrogant, selfish, right? Which, those could be the major constructs, but there's a lot more nuance to that.
And they don't see themselves as doing anything wrong.
Right.
I think it's funny though how a lot of Trump supporters, or you hear about all the violence over mask wearing.
Mm-hmm.
People getting stabbed because they're being asked to wear a mask in a store. They're being discriminated against. But some Trump supporters have internalized the stereotype that the left has pushed on them, that Trump supporters don't wear masks because they're assholes and they don't believe in science or whatever. So there was one particular story where a woman was told to wear a mask, didn't voice anything about her political stance, and then said, "You're discriminating against me because I'm a Trump supporter."
Yeah, I saw that on Starbucks. The
Right.
Starbucks,
Yeah, the Starbucks one.
Like what?
So they're assuming that you're a Trump supporter because
Yes.
you're not wearing a mask.
So that goes into that layer of perception. What I think your evaluation of me is.
Yep.
There's that layer, and it's see how many layers are disconnected between the Starbucks employee who's like, "Look, man, I make $12 an hour. This is store policy. I'm told to do this. I don't give a shit about whether or not you vote for Trump." But that is such a core part of her identity that she feels it's being attacked. Not only that, but just because you don't wear a mask, there could be multiple reasons why you don't do so. Maybe, like that guy, doesn't want to be a sheep, right? And that has nothing to do with his political leanings, although we assume that it's likely certain...
Just by that language, you can assume like a lot of things about it.
You can, but I'm just saying that there could be a multitude of reasons why. Like, personally, I don't like wearing a mask.
Yeah,
mostly
I don't think anybody
because
likes it.
Yeah. I still do it just because it's like it's. So here's the thing with the perception thing too. Everybody else could be wrong, and you could be right. Yeah. Are you going to fight 20,000 people? So are you willing to die on this hill? Are you willing to be? Are you willing to challenge that perception? Which battle is worth fighting for? You know what I'm saying? Like how much do you want to push this? Because at the end of the day, you're outnumbered by a lot, and it sucks.
Yeah.
So I don't like it, but I comply. But I think a lot of people like it because they're complying.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So there's a lot of layers for the people who are complying. There's multitudes of reasons why, and there's definitely a certain perception that I'm virtuous.
Yeah.
So there's that top-down, what I think of me, and what I think of others who are doing so, even though I'm complying, but I don't think I'm virtuous for it. I just think I'm like, fuck, it's better to get along than to not.
Right. It's interesting that you said virtuous. I mean, because you're only virtuous because you feel that society believes that wearing a mask is something that good people do.
Yeah.
So in order to be a good person, I'm going to conform with what I perceive as society to think of me and my actions.
Well, I had this with a friend of mine who lives in LA, who's she's pretty granola spiritual.
Granola.
Yeah, she's pretty granola
Dark
spiritual. I think so.
Yeah, it tastes
Yeah.
nice.
We're sponsored by VitaCup. It's this brand called VitaCup. They're pretty good.
Yeah, it's tasty.
Was that a French press that I saw?
Yeah.
Nice.
So, okay, sorry. So you had a granola.
What brand of French press?
Bodum.
Oh, Bodum. Buy a
Bodum.
cup. Sponsored by nobody.
Yeah. I also have this Pandemic game next to me. Pandemic.
It's called Pandemic.
That's pretty fun. Yeah, it's called Pandemic.
So you have a granola friend, crunchy.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, granola, to you? What does that mean?
Just like spiritual, and everything's organic, and there's like a big emphasis on like meditating and being mindful and all these things. And we were camping somewhere, and this is height of the pandemic, and of course, like this whole time we haven't worn masks. We're like hugging. No one really cares. Like, we're all relatively healthy people.
Right.
And we're just outside. And then we talk something along the lines of I think I said I'm gonna go see my parents in like 3 weeks, so this is perfect timing. From here I can kind of like self-isolate and like, you know, limit my interactions. That way I can see my parents and not have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
And she came on. It was her, and her mom was there too, who's a little bit older. And she was just like, well, I'm not really worried about getting sick because I feel like I'll be fine. And I'm like, yeah, no doubt. Like, I'm not worried about getting me sick.
Right.
It's like, I'm worried about getting my parents sick because like that's really fucked up if they've just been like self-isolating. They're really doing well. And I just come through and I'm like, by the way, I have coronavirus.
Yeah.
Now you do too.
Yeah. Sorry for AIDS?
Yeah. And like that kind of like just didn't dawn on her. And her mom was like, yeah, that's what I've been saying this whole time. It's not about your personal wellness. It's about like,
right,
you know, keeping those contagious rates down.
There's like a 98% survival rate. People throw that around like, well, people die all the time, and the people that are dying, that 2%, they're going to die anyways in a few years. And that's not the majority. There are plenty of young, healthy people dying. But so many people that, in my family, unfortunately, some of them, are of that view that it's been blown out of proportion, that it's really not as bad as it is, and the people that are dying would die anyways.
I'm just saying, man, like, that's not a good way to die.
No.
Like, breathing air through a tube.
Ugh,
like,
fuck that.
That's a hard thing to potentially put on someone else.
Yeah. I mean, it's still an illness, and you can still die from it, even if, again, the thing I always say is that even if it's 2%, but if you're in that 2%, then that's 100%.
Yeah, and what about the family of that 2% that lost their...
Not only that, but that argument is like, man, I go 90 and I don't use blinkers because fuck it, we're all going to die anyway. Like, you know what I mean? Like, at the same time, like, yeah, it's pretty risky getting into a car, but you don't think of it like, you know, you were texting and driving, your days were numbered anyway. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's just a weird thing, but it's also so many impositions that are layered into that. But it's so hard. So the challenge is, though, okay, so you have these layers of perception. So you're aware now of these like layers of perception. How do you do something about correcting or shifting your perception so that you can better communicate or better get along or better bridge the gap between you and someone else? That's like, you could be aware of all these things, but then the real challenge is what do you do about it so that you can create a better place for yourself and others?
And how do you think anybody reaches that point of either choosing to become more self-aware or more aware of your perception and other people's perception? And then how can that be forced upon you? What does it take if you're not willing to come to that conclusion yourself? Is there an outside force that can bring upon that innate feeling of need to be more aware of other people and their feelings?
You know,
DMT.
The answer is DMT. Yeah,
we have Joe Rogan here in the other room.
Yeah. That's, you know, since you're asking, Freddy, I personally have a belief. Like, this isn't like some validated study or anything like that. I don't know even how you would validate it. I have a personal belief that there's a segment of the population who cannot even be aware of their own awareness.
It's kind of a depressing thing to believe, but it kind of makes sense a little bit when you see people doing the same things over and over.
So I work with a lot of different people. I consult, I do coaching, and I've definitely run into people who cannot even be aware of how what I'm saying is not a threat. So they can't become aware of their own thoughts of why I'm perceiving this as a threat and whether or not I can evaluate that thought and try to better understand. Like, I cannot get away from fight or flight. So there's some people, I believe, that cannot become aware of their own thoughts. Then I think there's another segment who can become aware of their thoughts because something happened to them or something, like someone asked a question that like opened them up. That I think I fall into that category where like I got asked certain questions, or I had some experiences early in life that all of a sudden I just like woke up and I was like, whoa, what is I? And then I think some people naturally have that. Like they've always done that. So I think there's like these like kind of layers and levels of people.
Yeah, I mean, there are different levels of intelligence, emotional intelligence.
Check this out. Intelligence, IQ score is not correlated with awareness.
That makes sense.
Isn't that crazy?
Isn't it your EQs now? The thing that's correlated with...
They say that, so I don't know enough about the EQ research. There's a lot of debate as to whether or not EQs can actually exist, because there's a level of thought in psychology. It's like if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. But I'm not up to date on what the research is today. So what I was taught was like it hasn't been measured, so therefore it doesn't exist. But I'm curious to dive deeper into the leading researchers, which I haven't done yet, so I can't speak on that, like other than my own like intuition and perception.
Yeah, and kind of like a really broad stroke into like, again, how do you increase that awareness in people and blah blah blah, and like those thoughts is that like, I mean, if you have that pyramid of needs, right? Like even if
like Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah. It's easy to say if someone is like impoverished and stuff like that, like they may not have the time or the ability to introspect because they're just like, cool, where's my next meal coming from? Where's like, how am I going to pay for rent? How am I going to provide for, you know, however many kids that I have? But then even like those people that have those needs met, but then they don't have it met like personally.
Okay.
So even if they're making $75K, but like to them that's not enough to like fuel that base layer of like needs, whether it's like materialism or you know, whatever reason why they don't feel like that's still enough, then they're kind of stuck in that like level of like, well, I still have to like put myself first, I still have to do all these things, and until those needs are met, I can't even begin to like think of how my experiences are affecting people around me.
Even though I would say that it would still benefit you to think that way if you're in that fight or flight. Like that's like constant flight or flight.
I
like
like that you brought it back to that.
You're constantly, you know, going into that parasympathetic. I think it's parasympathetic. I think sympathetic is when you're like chilled out, and then parasympathetic. I can't. It's
SNS.
One of the two.
I think SNS is when you're fight or flighting, and parasympathetic is when you're relaxing.
Oh, okay. Well, whichever is the fight or flight core lizard brain,
Your
amygdala. Yeah. If you're constantly engaged in that, I think it's very difficult to become aware, but at any point in stage you can like chill out and become more aware.
Yeah, well, that's what that book was kind of like suggesting.
Behave.
Right? Yeah, so then
Who's it by?
Sapolsky.
Sapolsky.
Yeah, Robert
why do I
Sapolsky.
know that name?
Very popular name. I think you recognize that.
Oh, is he a teacher at Harvard? I think he has some lectures. Like he's got a big beard.
I think he is.
And I've listened to some of his lectures. He's a great presenter. Because he teaches to like undergrad students in these lectures that are recorded, and he's able to simplify them and challenge them with stories and like give them questions. Very intelligent guy.
Yeah. I actually didn't realize I had 2 books of his already.
Sapolsky. I bet that's him. What's the other book? That's
yeah.
That's him.
That's the beard.
What's the other book?
Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Also a good book.
Why don't they?
Dude, I might have to borrow one of those.
Yeah. It's because they have better stress response than we do.
Yeah.
So ulcers are like very much so. I mean, there's a physiological reason why I get them, but most of it is also like through like increased stress, cortisol production.
Yeah, it's a very human thing.
Yeah. So that's what I was saying is that your amygdala will fire, right? But then the human component is your prefrontal cortex saying that's not a threat to me. I can cut that out and interpret it based on my experiences and based on like what I want to interpret it as.
Right. So how did you develop awareness? How did you develop metacognition? Because that is not something that people do naturally. I think most people don't do it naturally.
I don't know. I mean, I definitely noticed a big shift in my thinking when I turned 25, which is coincidentally like when your prefrontal cortex fully develops.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just became like a lot more patient, and I just stopped reacting to things like right away, which I always kind of did because I was always like, well, why am I going to be angry about this? Like, what is this anger going to serve? Nothing. So
see, that's a a reflection on your own experience?
It's just like I don't want to deal with like those emotions of like, cool, if I get angry, then I'm gonna need to take 10-15 minutes to like be angry, and then another 10 or 15 minutes to, like simmer down, and then that just ruined an hour of my day.
Very pragmatic.
Versus like, all right, that sucked. I got hot for a minute. Let it go.
It's very cold calculation. You know what I mean? About a topic that's the antithesis of cold calculation, because you're essentially coldly calculating getting hot and bothered.
Yeah. But I mean, I've always recognized that that's a weird trait that I have, and it has advantages and disadvantages. Like,
yeah,
the advantages of it is like I don't get too angry about anything, but then I also don't get super elated over things. Like, I'm not like if something good happens, I'm like, fuck yeah. I'm just like, cool.
Yeah.
I'll take that as good news.
Yeah, you finally got into climber heaven, and
Yeah.
you were like, sweet. I'm not gonna go to climber hell. He did. He had the project of the lieback crack at Santee.
Lieback
That
crack.
the V1 that you use the side pull.
The
and
dyno
we did it.
lieback.
We did it together.
Oh yeah,
The warm-ups.
Yeah, the lieback,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
classic lieback problem on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like one of those things that like it serves both an advantage and a disadvantage.
I don't know if I would even call it a disadvantage on the elated part, because emotions are often irrational, and then they shape your behavior. So if you instantly react to anger or instantly react to just overall complete joy and elation, you might make a poor decision.
But he's got a good point. So I teach this to all the people in my entry level like personality classes, is that your personality is both a strength and a weakness.
Yeah.
And that the overdevelopment of your personality needs to be counterbalanced down the road. And let's say you don't have a strong reaction to certain things. That may be an inappropriate reaction to something that's happening. So, for example, let's say you have a wife of 20 years and she cheats on you, and you're like, oh, well, I'm upset, but I guess I wasn't planning to have herpes, but you only live once, and I wasn't expecting it getting it this way. Yeah, it's just curable,
Right?
As opposed to
suppressible, not curable.
As opposed to like getting like really
It's
upset.
not curable?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck, dude. I got some phone calls to make.
Yeah.
Right.
Why am I
Or
taking these pills?
imagine almost losing your life over something, right? And that's
Yeah.
not like bothering you, or perhaps some environmental issues are happening that immediately affect you, and you're not primed to action. Like you're not being fueled by that passion, and therefore you're not motivating other people.
Okay.
Because you're just cool, calm, and you're not like fired up. Like I was watching this. I was listening to this podcast, and this guy was talking about his experience in a protest, right? So he'd never been to a protest. He goes day one, and day one, cops fire tear gas on them, and he's screaming, "Oh my God, I just got," and I'm like mimicking his voice.
Okay.
I just got tear gas. This is so wrong. This is so, oh my God. Day two, protest. He gets geared up in combat boots.
Oh, nice.
Like, he goes full in. Ah, and he's like recording all this. So they're like in the podcast or whatever I'm listening to, they have like snippets of this. Day three, this motherfucker's on a microphone charging up the crowd.
Damn.
So the point of that is like he is now motivating other people off pure energy.
Yeah.
There is no substance behind what he's saying. There's no cold calculation. There's no deep understanding of the issue that they're fighting for. It's just pure pent-up frustration, and it's motivating and mobilizing people.
Yeah.
So it's still irrational.
Yeah.
But you can get shit done that way.
But what are you getting done? I mean, if you're not understanding the
That's a different
issue
thing.
well
Yeah,
enough,
yeah.
then you're relying also, if you're not sharing actual information that you've researched and you're just yelling emotion and energy.
That's what he was doing.
Then you're requiring other people to then figure it out on their own. And they might latch onto your energy. You're just over the top.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that productive, I guess?
Well, outside of just productive, because yes, we could argue that. The point is you cannot get away from your humanity. And at the end of the day, you could be the most cold, smart, calculated person, but if you got 30,000 mobilized people and you are at the other end of that spectrum, you're fucked. Doesn't matter how good your ideas are. And that's kind of like the guy who's like saying, hey, look, I'm pretty sure the earth isn't at the center of the universe. And the Catholic Church is like, I'm going to chop your balls off, bro. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter if you've mobilized people in a certain way. So, like, there's that give and take. You know, there's morally, I agree with you that you want to have a more reserved, calculated approach. But like Alvin said, there's also a weakness to it. You're disconnected from tapping into other people and influencing, because you need that elation, you need that enthusiasm, because not everyone can go to the layers of analysis that you are. But maybe you need to mobilize them. Maybe you need people to help you with your visions and your inspirations and your dreams.
Yeah, if you want to get something done, especially if it's radical, you do have to be a radical person with a radical. I've kind of lost my train of thought, but
I'll give you another example. Hey, I need people to clean up at Mount Woodson. Do I go, hey, look, there are 30,000 liters of trash that are dumped into Mount Woodson every week. We have 10,000 garbage bags that we can fill. We can use tongs to pick them up, and I've calculated that 30 people working 1 hour every weekend for the next 3 weekends could clean up all the trash.
Well, then you're just a shit motivator.
I mean,
Right?
but that might appeal to some people that are looking at it like,
yes,
okay, that seems like a far doable thing versus like, we're going to clean up Mount Woodson. Then like, for me, I'm like, how are you going to do that? Like,
right.
what do you have in place? Like, how have you already thought about this?
Sure. So I think it's like finding a middle ground between the two. Mm. We're tired of the trash, tired of trash, tired of trash. And we have a step-by-step plan, you know, like go online and you'll see the details. But for right now, get rid of the trash. Yeah. No trash here. You know, you have those 3-letter words, no trash here. You know, people love that shit.
Yeah.
People love those 3-letter words.
But you need a brochure.
You need a brochure. You need pamphlets.
You need a website.
Yeah.
You need a podcast.
Yeah. So, Freddy, how did you become aware of your thoughts?
It definitely fluctuates. I mean, you can obviously still get in your head and become selfish, and then it's kind of situational in a sense. But then usually I realize my behavior, and it comes down a lot to forgiveness, I guess. I think self-awareness goes hand in hand with acceptance for me. Being aware of my own thoughts and my own mistakes and my own reactions to emotions that might then hurt other people's feelings or just make them have a shitty day. And then that also helps me then rationalize their behavior. It's, have you ever heard of Hanlon's razor?
No.
It's don't attribute what seems as, I'm not sure. If somebody's being a dick to you, or if it feels like they're doing something to hurt you, don't attribute malice to what could just be incompetence.
That's a good. Yeah.
Or just rather a lack of awareness. I mean, people are so stuck in their own heads, that's really what most people care about. So I think what it took
That's
for
the
me...
introspection illusion, right? The weight of my experience of your whatever it is, I heavily weight the infraction, and I'm more likely to imbue upon you a harsher sentence. Yeah.
So for me, I think it took hurting a lot of people in my life. And for a while, you know, like that illusion of, you know, I'm hurting people and I can see that, you know, and people are pulling away, or they get mad at me for my decisions and they tell me that it's hurting them. But then I say, well, if I just remove myself from your point of view, your life, I can still make these poor decisions because they're really only hurting me. And you're being selfish by acting like my decisions, which don't involve you, at least in my own head. Now you're putting these negative emotions on me and making me feel bad for doing something that I want to do for me.
You pee-pee.
Exactly. Making me feel bad about my shitty choices.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think at some point I just became fed up with myself or fed up with my life situation, and I started hurting from my own decisions and recognizing that, and then that kind of framed then, you know, this is hurting other people, and other people are experiencing pretty much the same thing that I'm experiencing in their own heads. So if I hurt them, it's kind of hurting me. And so it built from compassion to some sort of awareness, and awareness to acceptance, and then trying to practice acceptance helps keep me self-aware.
So then at what age did you that happen?
Probably when I turned 21.
21-ish.
Realized I wanted to live a different way because my life was just fucked up, and I didn't want to bring other people into my shit. So it was a selfish, very personal, emotional event that took me realizing that my actions affect other people, but it was really rooted in my actions are hurting me. I better stop acting this way. And then I realized that, oh yeah, I'm making other people
suffer.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did you change it?
Because
you had the awareness, but then how did you move to change it?
I just didn't want to live the way I was living anymore. I was doing a lot of drugs that were really bringing down just everything. My life's just falling apart, And at some point I reached, what you call rock bottom, which is, there's always another rock bottom. But it really became like a life or death thing. And then I realized that I don't want to die. I want to be happy, And then when I actually started succeeding in that and changing things, that's what then broadened my understanding of how my behavior affects other people and how to be more aware of
can you link back to a small step that you made that gave you some positive reinforcement?
Well, the catalyst was not a small step. It was out of desperation. And then I guess it was just a learning process because awareness does come and go. I'll get caught up in my own head and my own hobbies and just really start living my life for myself and not be aware how my new decisions, my new actions are affecting other people until there's another sort of emotional response from other people or emotional response from me, and then it kind of snaps me back to reality. So then that's, I guess, when I got clean and wanted to change things, it then just became a slow 2 steps forward, 1 step back until I reach where I am now. So 7 years later, I'm 27, it's become easier, but I'm aware enough to realize that I often lose that high level of true awareness where I'm actually being selfless.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're hitting on something that's I have a theory that the way that you change the impact that you're having on others and actually start bringing more benefits to your life is there's a couple ways you can do it. First is changing how you think about it. So it sounds like you started with changing your thoughts. Another way is just to change your behavior and to start doing something different.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to be chicken or the egg. It's a chicken or the egg type of thing because if you change your thoughts, you're more likely to change your behavior. If you change your behavior, you're more likely to change your thoughts.
You can't really change your thoughts, though, at least. I don't have any control over the next thought that pops into my head.
Well,
I can think about my thoughts differently, but I can't force myself to have different thoughts.
But what those thoughts, what kind of effects they have on you, right? And that goes with, the habits and the behaviors that you have.
So for Alvin, an example of changing thought is, okay, I'm now thinking about my anger. So that's a different thought.
Yeah.
Not saying that you have control over your thoughts, but that you can orient them differently.
Yeah, not just react in a rote manner to them.
Right.
And let your emotion then lead to another emotion that then alters behavior.
Yeah. For me, I'm not sure which one it was, but I think there was some mixture of the two, behavior and thought. And one of those two came first, or they both happened in lockstep with one another. I'm not sure.
Because they do go hand in hand.
They do.
Because it's back to intention. You can have good intentions, but if you're not letting them affect your choices, then what's the point of feeling like you mean well because you're not acting on that?
And kind of what's wild about it is if you keep doing that over years and years, that change, that behavior and thought changes you, which ends up creating a new process of new behaviors and new thoughts. Because if you keep doing that, you're just walking into the unknown, constantly changing, and you're picking up new things that then force you to keep, and like if you keep going in a positive direction, the positivity just keeps growing. It's like exponential positivity.
Yeah.
Until something, like a meteor hits you and it drops you down. I mean meteor metaphorically, not like literally obliterating you, but like someone dies or you lose a limb.
It's a thing of like you habitualize these things until you become that person, right?
Yeah.
So like
manifest.
I read a book on habits, but like everyone kind of wants, like, if you're starting a new habit, like I want to read more often. Like at some point, like that's just a thought that you put into behavior. Like, cool, I will read at 9:30 every night before sleep, and then it's an easy way to implement that. Until sooner or later, you're just finding yourself picking up that book at like 4:30 in the afternoon because like, what else are you gonna do?
Right.
And then sooner or later, you don't even realize it. Like, you just read books.
Yeah. So that's if you can. I tell this, if you can understand goal setting and how to effectively implement goals, it changes who you are. Because if you can actually follow that process, like you just end up becoming a different person by the end of the process. It's really powerful, and a lot of people don't know how to set goals. And some people naturally know how to set goals. Like someone who's high in conscientiousness just seems to just do it naturally, versus someone lower in conscientious needs to learn how to do that. Not saying that high conscientious can't like more effectively goal set. It's just that they're innately like goal oriented. But some people can actually learn how to do it, and it changes who they are further down the road. Like your personality can change. Not significantly, but like enough.
Yeah. You reach a goal, and then you suddenly don't have that goal anymore, and that's no longer guiding the direction of your life. So you create a new goal, and then suddenly you've got a new fork to follow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll share how I remember, like, here was one powerful question that I remember, because I was like starting to like change how I thought. But then like when the metacognition started really coming in, I had this professor who asked this question it was a communications class, which people talk shit on communications class. Communication degree. I had a great communication degree that like totally changed how I interact with people. And what's funny is like, that's a soft skill that no one gave a fuck about when I was applying for jobs until I got a master's, and then now they just wanted to hear about my communications degree, and I was like, motherfucker. But he asked the question, he goes, what are you purposely not telling yourself? And I was like, I cannot answer that question unless I do metacognition, unless I engage in like thinking about my thoughts. I cannot answer that question unless I go, what am I not telling myself? Oh shit.
Yeah.
What am I purposely not telling myself? Whoa. That question blew my mind. It stuck with me forever.
And how long ago was this?
I must have been like, this was a sophomore year of college, so I must have been like 19, 20.
Oh, okay.
I was 20. I think it was second semester of sophomore year. Yeah. Second semester, spring. It was just eye-opening. It's like, whoa. It's really cool.
It's a great time to learn self-awareness, is when you're in school and you're learning so many other things, and then it helps you integrate them into your life. Become more honest. You realize that this thing that I learned can actually apply to me, rather than just as a theory that may or may not be used later on in my life.
Right. I use those sort of metacognition questions to gauge whether or not someone is better suited to work with me. Because if they cannot engage in that process, it's going to be significantly more difficult that if we have differences of opinion to come to an agreement. Because if you can't do that work, there's a whole layer of dialogue we can't have.
Yeah.
So like, this is particularly true in like conflict resolution and mediation. If someone can't answer the question, where do you, like, for example, if they think that they're going to win in a court settlement, right? What do you think's going to happen if you don't win? If they can't answer that question and they go back to, well, I am going to win, so therefore, like if they can't even engage with the possibility, of something outside of what they already believe, like it's going to significantly make it more challenging to resolve conflict.
Interesting. Yeah, they've already made up their mind on what's going to happen because their thoughts are right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Introspection
right.
illusion.
Yep.
Right back to naive realism. It's not even that I'm challenging whether or not you are right. You can't even fathom a reality where you're not right. That makes it really difficult. How have you guys dealt with people with like the differences of perception? How have you, anything comes to mind with like a recent thing where you have a different perception with someone and then like there's just no...
Yeah.
How have you tried to deal with that?
Yeah, so actually this is very... I think it applies. So an experience I had yesterday.
With this guy named Sanan.
With this guy named... Yeah, dude, you know him?
Yeah, douchebag.
Dude's name is Travis. He lives next to me, not the house to my left, but the next one to my left. And he and some other people on the street are trying to get some money together to cut down these trees that are down the way in the canyon that are obstructing some of their views. And it's going to cost $28,000. They got approved to get it done. So this guy's going around and trying to divide up the cost. So my parents live on this nice canyon, and they have a decent view of the water, and the trees aren't in their way. I mean, they have no reason to want them cut down. They don't want to contribute the $6,000 to pool the resources. The trees look nice, and they might be a sound buffer from the road. So anyways, my dad ran into Travis, and Travis is really spearheading it. His house would really benefit with a new view. And they talk briefly, and then Travis goes, so, are you going to chip in for the trees? And my dad's like, no, I don't think we want to do that. And Travis immediately goes, that's fucked up, man. And then just starts walking away and then looks around over his shoulder and is like, fuck you.
Whoa.
He didn't even bother to try and put himself in my dad's shoes about like why he doesn't want to chip in.
Right.
He immediately assumed that my dad's motivation was, well, they're going to do it anyways, so why even bother putting the money towards it?
Yeah.
And
At least you think that's what he's thinking.
Yeah.
That has to be it. I mean, unless the guy is just insane.
Well, let's think about like some of the other possibilities. There's that.
Mm-hmm.
One is you don't support me. You're not supportive.
Right.
Most people take that as a personal insult when you don't want to do the things that they want to do. So he could be thinking like, you want me to have a shitty view.
Yes, there you go.
You
That's
know,
another possibility.
Which is like the kind of like the other end of that spectrum of like, oh, now you're conspiring against me, which is like happening more and more. I feel like more people think that way.
That's so crazy.
It's
so true. And it's funny how like it sounds like that. Did you observe this conversation?
And so my dad came in and told me about it later on.
So they're just like chit chatting, and it just like
out of nowhere, he's like, "Yeah, so do you want to chip in on this project that will benefit me and really not you so much?" But I think he does believe that it will benefit my dad, and then
but can't communicate that.
But can't. It didn't even care to ask. Well, I think that's fucked up that you don't want to help out when it'll help you. I mean, you obviously want these trees cut down the same way that I do. So by choosing not to go along with me, it's a direct attack on me and my idea. You don't care about helping me. You don't want to chip in on this project that's going to benefit all of us because that's his belief. He didn't bother asking why and whether or not it actually would benefit us personally.
Right. So if we go back to like those layers of perception, he has a view of himself. He's clearly right. There's that introspection illusion. Like his high level of analysis of this is like clearly on the right side of good.
Right.
He sees your dad as a certain type of person, right? You're my neighbor. You care about the community.
Right.
But because you said no, the reason why you do that is because you are anti me, whatever that is. Like that's a quick snap judgment. And then I probably believe that the community thinks this is a good thing. Right? Like why else would you not say no? You're part of the community.
Sure.
And then
now if your dad pays $6,000 to have more trees planted right there,
ooh,
that's a direct attack.
Dude, that would be hilarious.
That would be a direct attack. And then that guy can be like, that's fucked up. Fuck you.
Right. Like,
So
no,
if-
fuck you, bro.
So if you're in your
on
dad's
now.
position, what would you do about that? Because now there's a rift between you and your neighbor.
Right, and my dad's not confrontational, and I am a lot of the time. So when I heard that, I'm like, so...
You square up, what up, cuz?
Right. Or so if I see him on the street, should I just tell him to fuck off? And my dad's like, well, I mean, you can if you want. I'm not going to say that. I don't want to start a feud. So that was my reaction was, fuck this guy, man. I want to go confront him about this. Tell him people don't have to do exactly what you want. Are you really that self-centered? Mm-hmm. That would be cool to just come up and just lay into the guy. I mean, it would feel satisfying, or at least the fantasy of doing it would be satisfying.
Yeah, putting someone in their place, dominating,
and that,
submitting someone else.
That justifiable anger that makes you feel like you're truly in the right and that they're a bad person for whatever reason.
Sure.
But that didn't last very long, and then eventually I did try to start thinking from his point of view, like maybe this guy isn't insane, where he believes that everybody's out to get him. No. Or that everybody needs to conform to his desires. There's got to be a reason. I mean, the guy's intelligent. I mean, he has friends. He's social. He can't be that emotionally retarded. So then I started thinking about, well, why? Oh, he believes that this is really going to benefit us and our property value. And we recognize that. And this is his thought process.
Yeah.
And we also recognize that he's already got 8 other people on board, or whatever the math is. What's 28 divided by whatever to get to 6? Mm-hmm. So anyways,
not a lot. That's like that's less. That's like between 4 and 5.
Right. So he's got enough people essentially, and it's gonna happen anyways. And again, I think this is putting myself in his shoes. So therefore, my neighbor Fred and Freddy, they're just gonna go along. They're just gonna ride this out. It's gonna happen anyways. They're gonna benefit from this, and they're being selfish because they don't want to contribute to this thing that is going to benefit the community. Mm-hmm. So that clicked in my head. I'm like, well, okay, yeah. So if I do run into the guy, which I most likely will, lead with that. Ask him, hey, why were you so rude to my dad? He really.
How do you think he's going to respond to that though? Why were you rude to my dad?
Yeah, I don't know.
You bitch-made motherfucker. You might as well be saying that.
Pretty much entitled twat.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm sure it'll be contentious at first. There's a lot of emotion, obviously, on his side. But really, I think the only way to go about it is to explain what our thought process is, and try to help him see us from our point of view, why we don't want to do this, and why it's not selfish. We can't stop you. We don't want to stop you. You already have approval from the HOH in that apartment complex, because these trees are really tall and can be dangerous.
What's an HOH? A hoe?
A hoe? Yeah, ho.
A ho.
Homeowners. Oh, HOA, Homeowners Association. Okay. That's what I meant to say.
I was like, maybe it's something different.
Homeowners homes.
Homeowners homes. That makes sense. So this is the other part of perception, is bias. So there's something called the bias blind spot, meaning that we all have like these perceptual biases. So you're identifying like this guy, Travis, has a bias. He's making assumptions. Yeah. And the stronger your bias and the more you're blind to it, the more likely you are to undervalue advice from other people if it conflicts with that bias. So you're more likely to resist, information that disconfirms your bias or that directly tries to address your bias, because you're so blind to it, you can't even. It's almost. Have you guys seen Westworld?
Yeah.
You see? Oh, perfect. So
a great show.
So there's this scene. So for those people who haven't seen Westworld, there's these like robots, right? And they have been inputted in with information. So they're running these algorithms. If they get shown a picture of non-Westworld, so they're living in like Western times, they're wearing like house on the prairie type clothes.
They look exactly like humans.
Yeah, they look like humans.
Can't really tell them apart.
But then there's a few scenes where they get shown a picture of like the modern world. So you have these skyscraper buildings, maybe you have all this tech. They look at it and they say, I don't know what that means. I don't know, like they don't know what they're looking at. Similarly, you might say something to a guy like Travis and it cannot even register because his blind spot is so high that it just does not register. So he may not be able to see something from your perspective, especially if if you lead with why, because the question why typically asks someone to justify themselves.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like further rooting him into his bias. And that's really difficult. That bias blind spot is such a hard thing to overcome because, another example. So they did this experiment with people. They gave like a bunch of random people a bogus test. And the test, they told people, was to evaluate your social competence. Okay. So you give 100 people a test, you say, hey, evaluate social competence, will you take it? They found that people with a higher bias blind spot, right? So a bias to see themselves as whatever. And they said, hey, you scored really well on this. They're like, yeah.
Fuck yeah, I did.
Of course I did. They're more likely to agree.
Yeah.
If you said, hey, you know what? This actually shows that you scored poorly, they're more likely to disagree. Versus someone who has a lower bias is less likely to, not that they wouldn't agree, it's just that they're not as high in agreement with the test and not as high in disagreement with the test, depending on if you told them they're not or are socially competent. So you have this like bias that like further validates their point of view. And I think that's you're seeing that right there.
Right, and it's sad to go into. I don't really want to go into the conversation.
You have to though.
Well, I mean, I want to go into it hopefully and honestly, because it's a really high possibility that the guy is so blind to other people's, or just unable to put themselves in other people's shoes.
Yeah.
And internalizing those biases, you can kind of make them a part of your personality, and then somebody challenges this or asks you to think a different way, and suddenly they're attacking you as a person.
Yes. And think about also this, Travis isn't clearly thinking about the long-term consequences of having a fuck you relationship with your neighbor.
Yeah.
Because your dad has a 30-year fixed mortgage. He's got a 30-year fixed mortgage. Who's leaving first?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you probably experienced like that. Someone's like not thinking about, oh, I have to interact with this person long term.
Yeah. I mean, I've done that too.
How so?
I mean, not so much burning bridges because, like, but like kind of moving in a way that, like, I don't think I did anything that the other person should take personal, whether or not they do or don't. That's obviously up to them. But, like, because in my mind I'm framing it as, like, they shouldn't take this as personal.
Yeah.
Then I'll still wade in as, like, as objectively as I would like to think. But, still understanding that, like, I'm saying things from my point of view.
Right. So they're, like, mad. They're like, this is still pissing me off. And you're like, I understand you're pissed off, but you really shouldn't be.
Yep.
So, like, I don't know. It's beneficial and it's harmful.
So tell me, I'm trying to work through something, Freddy, and maybe I would benefit from you guys, like, telling me whether or not this works. Okay. But, like, let's use your conflict as an example. I have some theories as to how people can overcome the perceptual differences and bias. And I have a few rules that I'm trying to, like, create to help people in my classes, like, take something tangible away from learning this perception stuff, but then what can they do with it? Right? And the first rule is to try and create mutually shared perceptions. So the way that I'm thinking of combating differences in perceptions is to find ways that you can agree. So finding common ground, it's like it's a common conflict resolution thing. But now there's a lens of perception there, is how can you create mutually shared perception?
So, like, with your neighbors thing, all right, like, when you said that you want to approach him and be like, why were you such a dick to my dad? Yeah. And, like, all three of us agree that that's probably gonna, like, raise that amygdala response for him.
Put him on the defensive.
Yeah. Like, the first thing I thought of was, like, approaching him and saying, how's that project of yours going?
Yeah.
And that way, like, you're still getting to the point.
It's an opener.
But, like, you're actually showing interest in, like, oh, how's that thing going for you?
Yeah.
And then from there, you can kind of go into it. Yeah, we never really notice it. For us, it's not in our eyesight and blah, 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 blah. But I think it's great that you're doing something, even if that might not be genuine.
Sure.
But you're kind of disarming him from like thinking of your conversation as combative, and then hopefully you just drop enough nuggets in there like, oh, this doesn't affect Freddy and his family. Like, why should they care?
So curiosity is a great opener. It's really disarming, just being curious about someone's experience.
Yeah. People love talking about themselves and what they're doing.
Yeah. So I think one of the mutual perceptions that you definitely would want to resolve with this Travis guy is the long-term relationship he's likely to have with your dad.
Yeah.
So that should definitely be something that needs to be addressed, is like, can you create a mutually shared perception that you're going to have to live with one another? So having a hostile, combative interaction is probably not beneficial. So how do you set up the conversation in a way that you can actually address that? Because you can't be like, why the fuck did you say that to my dad?
Yeah.
Like, that's hard.
Yeah. And that's like the most satisfying thing to do, again, if you feel like you're in the right.
Right.
Forcing your will on somebody else because you're in the right. I don't want to make the relationship worse between me and Travis, and between Travis and my dad, because my dad is I mean, he's older than I am. He's got a lot of years.
I think so.
A lot of emotional intelligence.
What'd you say?
I would think he's older than you.
I never asked him actually how old.
I knew this one guy whose dad was younger than him.
I knew a guy that was his own dad.
Well, now we're in Alabama, where like your brother is also your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm my own grandpa.
Like, that's my mom, but also my girlfriend.
Oh, dude, gross.
That could actually happen, and that's scary.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But we're the same age. What?
Yeah.
How's that possible?
And I mean, I don't know your dad at all. Like, I don't know, and this is not to like discredit him at all, but you're also, the way I always think about things is like, he also told you a story from his perspective. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
You
and like,
there.
We've had conversations before where like, you'll tell him like, yeah, that sounds like you're right. And I'm like, yeah, that's because I told you that story.
Yeah.
Of course it sounds like I'm right. I'm telling it to you.
Yeah, that's the introspection illusion. Like, of course.
Yeah.
Like this is how I thought about it.
Of course I'm the good guy in this story. I told it to you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you that I was irrational.
Yeah, I mean, I only shot the guy in the leg for, swiping my car. Like, what a dick, Like, swipe my car.
In the stomach.
Yeah, I mean, I could have ended him.
Considerate. Yeah. I was thinking about the long-term
consequences. It's a flesh wound.
He used his blinker, so
yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. One of the things is like, one of the things that I challenge people at my work to do is to learn to ask better questions. That is one of the most fundamental communication skills that you can develop. Is like, first people typically get taught to ask more open-ended questions, but close-ended questions are actually good too. And maybe if you can have a conversation with Travis and at least like ease up to it, develop some credibility, rapport, make it comfortable, is like eventually ask the question. It's like, hey, so I heard that you told my dad, fuck you. Do you really believe that?
Right.
And that's a close-ended question, yes or no, because you want him, because if he says yes, that's a cold-hearted motherfucker, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to have problems later down the road. But if he's like, no, I was pissed, that's a huge, like, because he's likely, it's not an open-ended question, but he's likely to, if he says no, to like run on. And then that opens up more dialogue, because if he says, no, I was just upset, and he's more likely to then be like, maybe I need to apologize. Like, you don't have to tell him that.
Sure. And also, from maybe his motivation in that situation, you ask him, like, why did you do that? Why did you say fuck you to my dad? Or did you mean it, I guess, was the yes or no question.
Well, why is enabling him to justify.
You're attacking him. So the yes or no, and I think in that situation, it's easier just to say no because it reduces conflict right then and there.
Right.
And then so maybe he doesn't exactly mean, no, I didn't mean that. Maybe he's just saying that to just kind of help this conversation end.
Right.
He might internalize that no. Like, why did I say no? Is there actually truth behind that? Do I mean that in this way?
Right.
And that's that's productive.
Yeah. It's figuring out how can you create mutually shared expectations, or like how can you create mutual perceptions about something? How can you like take that disconnect and like all those 4 layers? How do we bridge that together seamlessly? And it's like, can you think about some things that help do that. How do you create mutual perceptions? That's my one rule.
You just yell at them, dude. You either shame them.
You bitch!
Right? Yeah, just put them down, so they're just a puddle of just insecurities. And then you build them back up with your own thoughts.
Bingo!
Because you're right all the time.
Yeah.
So that's actually something that people believe they're doing when they go out and they like try to impose their perception on other people. That's what they do at protests, or that's what they do at like when the stakes for them are so high. It's like, don't you know that this is happening to these people and this is wrong? What they're trying to do is have you adopt their perceptions, but it's done in such a hostile way that of course you're going to resist that if you're not already like sympathetic to that point of view. It's going to be very hard. Like you're literally isolating the very people you're trying to convince, because the people who are convinced by you were already there to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just it's so simply stupid. It is such a simply stupid human thing, I feel, that we try to do that we're just so unaware of.
We try to get from point A to Z a lot of the time. I mean, we're already at Z, you're at A.
Yeah.
But you can't then just force a complete shift upon this person's thinking without kind of giving some reasoning or explaining how you got to the position you're at, and then how it's actually rational. Because
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's because it's like you said, you're going from A to Z. There's a lot of little steps to get there. And what I have found in terms of like conflict is that I often never actually have to explain myself. It's better that they figure it out for themselves by just interacting with me.
Huh.
You know what I mean? Like that typically has been the most successful resolutions that I've had.
Unless
But it doesn't always happen. Doesn't always happen.
Yeah, unless they're the type of person that we're talking about that just isn't capable of it.
It happens, man.
Yeah. Well, it goes into like winning conversations as well. Like a lot of people try to have conversations so that they can win at the end of the day, and it's like, dude, that's not a conversation. Like,
Yeah. and
Like-
and the tough thing is some people cannot help that. They are so like disagreeable and they're just naturally disagreeable people, and they cannot help but view the world as a zero-sum game.
See, I like to do a little exercise with myself where I will get into like arguments with people, even on things that I don't feel that way, just to see like if I can pick up like different things from how this person's feeling, or like what this person's thinking of. Like, how well can this person elaborate on their thoughts, and does it make sense, or is it just like, like I'm a nice person and therefore I believe these things. Like, well, why do you believe these things? Like, what?
Are you talking about playing devil's advocate in like a real actual conversation? Okay.
Yeah, I tend to do that a lot.
So get this, Alvin. There was another study, and this is with the introspection illusion and the blind spot bias, where they did with this with students. So they assigned students a topic that they were supposed to advocate for. So everyone is aware that you're advocating for a topic that was assigned to you. It wasn't necessarily your position.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to do this exercise. People were more likely to view that I am objective outside of the position I'm raising. Like I am disconnected. I'll wait for the ambulance. But you probably see where I'm going with this.
Right.
So I'm not actually for this position because I know that I'm separate from the position. But when I observe you advocating for it, I'm likely to believe that you're biased in favor of that position. So we're better able to view bias in other people, but not view the bias in ourselves. So people who you're playing devil's advocate with are likely to believe that you actually hold that position because they're biased. And if they can't challenge their own process, there's a higher likelihood that they're going to view you as biased as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
I know that's fine for you. I'm just saying, like, that's something that's happening.
Yeah, because like, I mean, initially, right, like all these conversations, especially if you're doing that like argumentative thing, you start off in oppositional ends.
Yeah.
And then like little by little, you kind of come to like, yeah, that is true. And then, like, I understand your point there, but also here's this. And then if they're, I don't know, willing to listen. Like there should be kind of a melding of like meeting somewhere in the middle.
Right. You don't have to win the conversation on either side. You probably have to accept that both of you think you're right, and there's really, I mean, it can be painful to just suddenly admit that you're wrong in the middle of a debate. So even if you start to realize that, like, oh shit, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I don't actually believe what I'm saying at this point. Maybe you're right.
Yeah.
You're not. It's gonna be really hard to just say, dude, you're right. I mean, my point of view was wrong from the beginning. I accept your point of view now. Maybe that'll happen later on when they start thinking about it. And
I cannot stand people who cannot admit that they're wrong or are ignorant. That is like one of the most dangerous types of individuals going about. Not dangerous in terms of like violence, but just like woefully ignorant of the impact that they have on other people and are not taking responsibility for that. I'll give you an example. You guys know who Candace Owen is? Candace Owens?
She's like a political commentator, right?
Commentator, right? And like I think one of the big things is that she's a black conservative. Like typically like minority conservatives get put on this like position where they are looked at as like an invitation for other minorities, right? So they tend to get a lot of attention.
right.
So Candace Owens is a conservative black woman. And I remember I was watching like one of these like Joe Rogan episodes where she came on and they were talking about climate change. And so he did a great job at this. Confronted her about her views on climate change. And as she's talking about it and how she doesn't believe in climate change, she reveals that she really doesn't know any of the science behind climate change. But she is not willing to say that climate change could be real.
Oh, well then fuck her.
But like at the end of the day, I don't understand the science behind climate change.
Yeah.
So then like she is operating just like most people are on faith that what they're being told is real. But she was not willing to take a little bit of edge off her stance, right? So she was vehemently against people who say climate change is real. So she's being a voice for other people because she's representing like other views, and people like look at her as a model for whatever identity that they have. That's why they listen to her. That's why she has a following.
Yeah.
They're following her, and she's literally blind, leading other blind people.
Yeah. But she's got that energy that you're talking about.
That's the energy. Oh,
loud.
back to it.
Yeah. See, like that's a situation where that is just blind faith that's rabble-rousing other people.
Yep.
And you're making them figure it out on their own, or they're just not aware enough to actually think about it on their own. They're just going to rotely accept what's being thrown at them.
Yeah, so is it like the answer is like, well, don't speak on things that you don't know anything about, but then you would never speak on anything.
No, I think the answer is you pair yourself with someone
Yeah.
who can like justify those reasons for you, right? So like, I mean, not justify those reasons for you, but actually like prove the things that you believe in, right? So then, like, for example, Candace Owens, like the best thing for her to do is like, I don't know too much about that science, but you know what? I know someone that can explain this better to me, and then I can like start explaining that information better. Or, you know, if she gets called out for it in public, then she's like, cool, you're right, I don't know the science behind it, but let me work with a few people and we'll bring something up that has some scientific backing to it. Because then she's like that voice, but then she doesn't have like the ideas behind that voice.
Yeah. And so the responsibility lies on her to actually get talking points from people who can more argue on that level, but doesn't do that.
I would say not even like that can give her talking points. Just be like, talk to this person.
Talk to this person.
Yeah.
Like, I got you here. Now
Yeah.
talk to this person and see if their science or their findings can validate or disprove the things that I'm saying.
Now here's the danger though. Here's kind of like this sketchy point though. Like, does that reduce your isn't that kind of reducing your responsibility, because you're displacing the answer, like you're displacing you having to answer, which you have a platform.
Yeah.
Even if you're just like a local community organizer, right? Like you have a platform and your platform speaks to 30 people. Aren't you displacing the responsibility that you have onto someone else? And then you're still going through because you're like, I believe that person. That person gets discredited. It doesn't matter. I believe them, and I'm still going out parroting that I follow this guy or this girl.
So in the case of Candace Owens, right? Like, whatever science that she can say is a distilled version of what that guy is gonna tell me anyway. So instead of getting like her like telephone version of everything, of the details that he's given her or she's given her, I could just go to the source. And like, sure, Candace Owens would probably benefit from being able to explain it, but like, she's not gonna be able to explain it as thoroughly as someone else can. So like, yeah, she can get a baseline, like, you know.
Yeah, and then, but like what Sanan was saying, at that point, it could be seen as she's shunting the responsibility onto somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's so much easier to not do your own research and just accept this loud person's point of view. And they're like, you can get the truth from this guy.
Yeah.
I'm giving you a distilled version.
So, okay, so maybe I wonder if the answer is something like, so the danger lies in that you are saying climate change is not real, okay? There are a lot of different behaviors that someone who believes that could then do. So one could be littering, because you don't give a fuck, right? And which she said in the podcast, she doesn't believe in like littering. So I just want to like say that. But like there's littering, there's supporting businesses. There's dude, no, who would say that? But people do it.
Right.
I've seen people red-handed just toss shit out of their car. Right.
I'm helping people.
What's that?
I'm helping people by throwing this out.
It's ridiculous, right? Right. Okay, so you have littering, but then you also have pollution, which is like supporting businesses who just dump chemical waste. There's supporting policies that dump things or not dump things into like areas. There's projects, there's all sorts of things. So I would think the answer could be that she's like, or anybody could say, look, I don't believe in climate change, but here's what I do believe in. I believe in taking care of the earth by doing X, Y, and Z. Because you don't have to believe in climate change to not be okay with dumping. Right? So like, does climate change really matter? Like I was listening to this, we were having some diversity, equity, inclusion meeting, and this woman was saying how she was appalled because somebody she knew who was Christian said, I believe gay people are going to hell. And she was so appalled by that. She was upset. They had a fight about it. Because she's like, how can you possibly believe that? That's not okay. How can you just like incriminate, quote unquote, incriminate someone because of their orientation? But then I asked the question, do you need to believe that someone is going to hell or heaven in order to treat them with respect?
Yeah.
Because I could still believe Alvin's going to hell, but I could still treat him with respect because I can actually like get into a deeper conversation about, okay, well, if you meet somebody who's homosexual, how do you know?
Right.
How do you treat them? Like, rather than getting upset with the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? Like,
that's such a hard thing, though, for
hard.
people that are truly, I mean, it's a hard example for people to actually follow through on, because if you are that religious, or you believe the hardline stance that the Bible is the Word of God, it says that men that lie with other men are going to hell.
Yeah.
Then you see
or
gay
scissors,
people.
You know. Or scissoring, you know.
Well, first I've got to believe in heaven and hell. Exactly. So then I already lost respect for you there.
Yeah. But if you believe somebody's going to hell, you believe they have traits that deserve them being damned. So then how do you respect a person you think is evil?
So that's a legit question, but how do we even answer that question if we stop at, hey, you know what? Fuck climate change. And you don't dig any deeper. Or fuck, you know, homosexual people because they're going to hell. How you can't go any deeper if you don't ask those questions, if you don't talk about those things. So I just,
it's worth talking about.
It's worth talking about,
I mean,
right?
A conversation can't really hurt. When does a conversation actually hurt? When you're coming from a place of honesty
and genuine,
and genuine care and concern.
So you got to have a conversation with Travis. Hey, bro, do you believe in fucking climate change?
Come on, homie. What about hell? You think I'm going to hell if I want to cut down these trees?
Yeah, man, how do you feel about the gays?
What about gay trees?
They're going to hell for sure.
Those are my favorite trees.
Yeah.
They're all intertwined in there, you know?
That one's all not straight and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, so my big rule is create mutual perceptions about things. And how do you go about that is getting more specific about what those perceptions are. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? What do you guys think about that rule in general?
I mean, I could see it. My brain went to like being a salesperson.
Yeah.
So like, not that I'm a salesperson at all, but like if I can get you to agree with me that littering is not good, and I can get you to agree with me that like factory farming for the entirety of the planet isn't good, then it's like I can walk you towards like saying climate change is not good. Yeah, if I can make that link.
Yeah.
Of like these are all some parts equate to.
And it's okay because you can still believe climate change is a hoax, but as long as we agree on more of the fundamental elements, like, dude, we got to stop this factory farming stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the concept of like going to heaven and hell, right? Like if you just break it down to are you going to heaven or hell, then most people are like, I don't know, or like I don't believe in heaven and hell, so like why should I answer this question? Versus you go into like the traits of, do you believe that you should be kinder to the people you meet?
Right.
Yeah.
And
then it's like, yeah, I mean, who can benefit from being nicer?
Yeah, or do you believe you're a kind person? Yes, I'm a kind person. So how do you treat gay people?
Yeah.
Like, that's like, okay, if you believe, because I think that opens up. I think most people would not want to say, like, I just go around disrespecting people.
Yeah. Nobody's going to admit to that, even if they do it.
So one of the questions that I'd probably get is, okay, how do I go about creating mutually shared perceptions? One way is to leverage other people, leverage the perceptions of others. So I'm speaking about these rules in a business setting. One of the best ways to create mutually shared perceptions is that those perceptions aren't being authoritatively imposed.
Okay.
So let's say you have a supervisor who is managing someone who's a poor performer, but they believe they're a good performer. So that's that first layer, right? I believe you're a bad performer as a manager. You believe you're a good performer. So that's going to affect these other layers, which is how I view myself. So I'm a good manager. I view you as not being a good employee. And then I think that your evaluation of me as a supervisor is someone who's going to be fair and honest, because that's how I view myself. And then there's an agreement in the company that there's a certain standard of performance and you're not meeting it. But you as the employee think I'm a good employee, but I view you as a biased boss who's out to get me, right? So what I think how you evaluate me is biased.
Right.
So you're trying to get me. You're out here trying to make me a crook. And then my society or my view is like, look, my two homies on the team think you a bitch. You know what I mean? So how do you bridge that gap? So in a business setting, one of the things that I try to explain or help leaders do is to leverage other people on the team to share their perceptions so that it's not coming from you.
Okay.
But what also happens is that you end up realizing that your perceptions or what you think other people's perceptions are may not be what you thought they were. But what most of the time happens, those high performers typically share a much stronger connection than the people who are poor performers. They're usually more disconnected. But now you're hearing it from 5 people rather than the biased manager. And how much easier is that to change your opinion if you're the poor employee, if it's your colleagues, not just someone, authority figure who's institutionalized, right? They're just part of the system.
Right.
So that's like a second rule, but it kind of is like a sub-layer of the first one. How do you go about doing that? How do you leverage that?
Can you, I'd love to hear like any specific examples or like any specific success stories that you've had implementing these rules, or even not a success story.
So I'm trying to morph my practice into a class so I can teach leaders how to do this.
Okay.
So it's really tough. So I actually have gone through several exercises where this has worked.
Nice.
But I don't explain it the way I've explained it to you guys. So they're not aware that I'm leveraging like perception research and conflict resolution skills. They're just experiencing it, which is still great.
Sure.
But I'd like to evolve the process to teach people how to do it, because that's like the next level. Like if I can teach a leader how to do this, then I can just help facilitate it. I don't have to have so much hands-on. So the way that this has worked is we've taken, at least, you know, at the company I've worked for, let me just give you like a layout so you're just following me here.
Okay.
So there's an entry-level position, and then you get into a mid-level position, and then you get into the high-end position of service, okay? So you have these 3 layers of service, and then you have a sales team. So the sales team brings the money so that we can support these levels of service. And those levels of service help. So they all have to work together. Okay. So there's 4 roles. They all have to work together to service their client, but there's 3 levels within the service side, right? Entry level, pretty simple, right? You're just starting out. Your role's pretty easy. But then as you get into the middle position, what happens is you start getting a lot more people in that middle position, which makes sense. That's where you want the bulk of your team, because they're processing a lot of the services that you offer. But what ends up happening is over time, most of those mid-level people start having different perceptions of what their responsibilities are. Even though the institution says these are your roles and responsibilities, there's a lot of gray area.
Yeah.
I'm sure most people you talk to who have somewhat of a complex job, their roles and responsibilities don't outline all the things that they do. And they don't outline how they are supposed to do them as well. There's autonomy there. So there's some free will. So let's say you have 12 people in this middle position, all of which have slightly different perceptions about what they do. Now you have the lower level position and the high level position who has different perceptions about what those middle people do.
Shit.
And they don't communicate about how they work together. They only communicate about what they're working on. So when you have a team meeting, what happens is your manager gives you updates, tells you what's going on, and then like you just talk about like, okay, what's going on with this client or account? Okay, give me the updates. Okay, this is our strategy moving forward. But we never take a step back and say, how are we working more effectively together? So what I've done is I've taken these groups and I asked them like a few simple questions. What's your number 1 priority? What's your number 2 priority? And so in this middle position, what happens the most, especially, so like, for example, sales, I asked those 2 questions. Everybody on the sales team knows what their number 1 priority is and their number 2 priorities, and they all share that same thing. It's a simple job. Get new business, maintain your business. That's it. Super simple. But once you get into that more complex service role, they all have different number 1 priorities and all have different number 2 priorities. And as they're voicing it, they're all going, oh, shit. Oh, okay. We need to like standardize some of this because we all have the same job, but we're all doing it differently.
Right.
As they become aware of that perception, then I take that group and I have them share that to the other teams or the other levels of service. So now that group now unifies together, they become more aligned, and then they share that to their salespeople. They share that to the high-end service because all those people had different perceptions of the middle group, and now that they're hearing it straight from their mouth and they're unified, they're like, oh, that's what you guys do? And that's how you're supposed to do it? Oh, so when I do this, this impacts you this way?
Yeah.
Oh, and they just start clicking. So at first, when I've done these exercises, people are like, why the hell are we talking about this? My number 1 priority, everybody knows this. And then you all of a sudden realize, no, not everyone does. So that's how I've made it, that's how I've applied it into practice and have it been successful, is people start becoming more aware of a shared mutual perception, and then they can do something about it. Because how can we better improve our communication if I don't understand how what I do impacts you or what your priorities are?
And that's a great way to gradually teach other more abstract forms of self-awareness, because this is like a concrete expression of how communication and being aware of yourself and others can actually improve something physical, and you can see that change right from the beginning. Whereas if you're asking people to challenge their own biases, something that's very personal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can't really just teach that right off the bat. You got to show like why and who's going to benefit from this.
Yeah. So what I've done is an experiential process rather than an educational one, but they learn through it, but they don't know why it's working. They just know that they're experiencing something that's working. So my class that I'll eventually teach is like experimenting on how I can teach this to eventually senior leaders who can then apply it. But now I'm just working with like middle level leaders to see if like, oh, is this catching? Because I've done it and it works, but can you fish? As opposed to me like sitting there with the rod holding it with you and be like, okay, you feel that? Okay, now you tug. You know, now I'm letting go of the training wheels. Now you fish. Now you do it. So that's how I leverage other people's perceptions.
Nice.
And I've tried this in other areas, and sometimes people fight it because they just don't want to go along with the group.
Yeah.
Happens.
I mean, somebody is doing it better than other people. And I think probably a lot of people believe that they're doing it the best way, the most efficient way.
Well, again, it goes into like, they may be doing it in the best way for what they prioritize, right? So like, for my old job, one thing that I always encouraged people that I was managing was that, you know, we did annual reviews. I always told them like, pick 2 people that you know are going to give you glowing reviews. Because you want those. You want those like uplifting, like, you know, Freddy is a great worker, blah, 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 blah. But you also want to pick a couple people that you know are going to like rate you pretty low. Because then that's where you can allow some of that criticism to come in. And then what I always tell them is I'm not looking for a negative review. I'm looking for a pattern.
Okay. So
like, you know, if, again, you take Freddy and, you know, you have a consistent pattern of everyone says that you're
a bitch.
You're a bitch, hyper confrontational, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I don't remember working with you guys. How do you know this?
That's how much wrapped up in your own head you were. You didn't even realize I was there.
I didn't even see you.
Yeah. But, you know, like even the praises, right? I'd tell them that, like, one person saying you did something great is good, but if several people said you did that thing great, that's even, because that's a pattern. Then now we can say that that's a strength that you have across the board.
It's not just a personal relationship that you might have with this person that likes you and is more favorable.
Yeah, if your best friend was like, oh, Freddy is super easy to talk to, then, you know, obviously it's meaningful, but it's not as useful as like across the board people said that about you. And same thing with weaknesses is like, you know, if people are like lacking leadership skills. If one person said that, then like, you know, you can kind of not disregard it, but like not put it as a priority. But if everyone said that about you, no matter if they had a lot of good things or a lot of bad things to say, then you can hone in on, or I can hone in on that.
Yeah, it's got to be universal pattern for it to actually make some sense.
Yeah.
Or have some weight to it.
Yeah. The hard part was not everyone. So like whenever I would do my own like reviews, I would kind of go by that guideline of like, I'll pick a couple people that I know will give me great scores, and I'll pick a couple people that I've had a contentious relationship with.
Yeah. And
that way, like, it's not just like a pat on the back and I don't get to learn anything. It's like, cool. Why did I have such a contentious relationship with these people?
Yeah, and that's cool that you're picking this person that you know is going to not rate you as favorably.
Right.
It helps to actually, I think, you know, kind of you're kind of expecting what's going to happen. You're like, I know this relationship with this person has been somewhat contentious. They're probably going to give me some hard information I might not agree with, but I'm going to be somewhat expecting it. Mm-hmm. Rather than just randomly picking somebody and then out of the blue they tell you that you're a shit worker.
Yeah. And it also helps in that, like, I could have a reason why I think we have a contentious relationship, and then when that person writes down its anonymous review, it's completely different from what I thought they were going to say. You know what I mean? Like, so, yeah. But it's hard to get people to really do that because it's
very hard.
You have to have like job security and, because then if you ask someone like, give me people that will rate you poorly, they're like, why? I don't want to get fired right now.
Right.
It's funny. I used to work at Home Depot, and there was this manager that was just so mean to everybody. He really seemed to enjoy. He was an assistant manager, ASM, one of like 8 at the store, but he felt like he had all this power, and he did have power over most of the employees.
Huge penis.
He
But he power
relished
trips.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just swinging that dick around. He recently got fired because him and then a department head, ASM got fired, department head got moved to another store and demoted. Because the ASMs were asked to rate all the department heads from best to worst, and it was supposed to be anonymous. And this guy that was just so mean to everybody rated the DH that was also kind of mean. They were like two peas in a pod. Anyways, rated him number 1, but everybody else put this department head dead last.
Mm-hmm.
And the department head was like, I don't agree with this at all. He actually thought that he should be number 1. And
bias.
right. He knew that his buddy was going to rate him high, and he just kind of assumed that everybody else was just wrong. You know, that this guy, this friend of his opinion mattered most because it'd be that he knew him as a person. He knew his intentions. He sees things that other people don't see because he pays more, gives him more focus. So yeah, that bias that you have.
So why did he get fired?
Oh, yeah, I didn't even get to that point. Yeah, so he actually told the guy about the rating system. It was supposed to be completely anonymous.
Oh.
And then the guy that told me about this whole ordeal said that then both of them got caught in some lies. It came out that the manager had told the DH about it. So they were confronted, they lied about it, caught in the lies, and then come to find out they were living together. The DH, the guy way down the totem pole, living with the assistant manager. So then you might as well be fucking your manager at that point. I mean, that's complete, conflict.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. It was nice hearing about that, man. I was not disappointed. I mean, that guy was so mean, and apparently nobody else at the store was disappointed that he left. It's nice when toxic people get
their due.
Yeah, and when other people recognize them and force them to maybe it increased his awareness a little bit of how he treats other people, and maybe he's not completely right. If 10 people think he's a dick and his best friend thinks he's cool, are all 10 of these people completely wrong? I mean, maybe something good came of this. Maybe he'll recognize a little bit how his behavior affects other people.
So when you say that, you make me think that one of the things I don't address with the other rules that I have is, what if you're not in a position of authority? Mm-hmm. How do you go about, like, let's say you have a toxic person. How do you go about trying to change perception and change behavior and resolve conflict when you're coming from a position of you're coming from a low power position? So I have to think about that one. Because you also don't want to go around trying to create mutually shared perceptions, but it comes across as creating rumors and spreading ideas, and because then you can be looked at as like insubordinate and creating a mutiny. And so, like, I'll have to think about that one. That's an interesting play, because right now I'm kind of looking at from at least a manager perspective with the rules that I'm having for my class. But I also think about it as like just a regular citizen, where there's not a difference of power. So I should probably think about the low level power person as well. Not that for the class that I'm having, not that they'd likely need that perspective, but just for my own like reconciliation of how you organize that and how maybe the rules change, or maybe they don't. I don't know yet. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about having the people in your class more, at least like equals coming to equals. There's not that sense of an authority coming down on you where suddenly there's these consequences for accepting that I'm doing things poorly. Right. If I acknowledge that I'm doing a poor job, this guy might have recourse to take my job away. Right. Whereas if it's your colleague, somebody that you're equal with, comes to you and says, hey, I feel like you aren't, again, I'm just phrasing things in a way that just comes to mind that probably might not be the best way to approach it. But anyways, hey, I've noticed that you're doing this a certain way and it's affecting me in this manner. And if you can recognize that, maybe we will both work and have a better relationship. And if the person is not ready to accept that in any way, shape, or form, there's no consequence for just saying, I disagree with you. You're wrong. You have no authority over me. Your criticism doesn't mean anything. And so the stakes are lower.
Could be some consequence. Could resent you for it.
True, there could be
a little bit.
Yeah.
You fucking dick. Yeah. Well, interesting, man. I have some other rules, but we kind of went over them. The other one was to get better at metacognition. But I'd simplify that for the class. It's just like, just get better at what your biases are and just trying to think about how you think. Yeah. Think about how you think. That's the rule. It's just a little more easy, but it's metacognition. Think about how you think, and that could help you. It's also like, it's very difficult as well cross-culturally, because we've been talking about like creating mutually shared expectations, but like one of the underlying assumptions is that everybody speaks the same English. And everybody has, you know, especially in a work environment, there's more of a homogenous culture, right? So within a team, there's kind of one culture for the most part. There's probably like subsects, but when you're talking about going outside here in San Diego, now you're like intermixing. You have a lot of intersection of cross-cultures and different languages. So it's like, that becomes even harder for people, especially if you have poor communication skills. I'll give you guys another like example of like one of the studies that goes to bias. So they did one study where they gave people to rate themselves on how good they were at grammar, whatever, like how good they did at grammar.
How good can you grammar?
Yeah, and then they had like a discrepancy score. So they would give them a test to see how good their grammar was, and then they would rate themselves on how good their grammar was. And the higher the discrepancy between particularly poor performance in your view, so you would either self-enhance or self-diminish. Right? So higher performers tend to self-diminish because they're more aware of all the grammar rules.
Interesting.
So they would typically be either at where they're supposed to be because they have an accurate sense of self, or just, you know, slightly under. So they'd self-diminish, be like, I don't really know that much, right? Like, you know, if I asked you about something, you'd probably be like, well, I'm good at this, but...
Well, it's like the Kyle Dunningham effect, where it's like you take someone who's a complete novice at something, but, you know, is like starting to, and they'll have an elevated sense of like the things that they can do.
Yeah.
And then you talk to a very advanced person and they know like how much they have left to grow.
Yeah.
Right. And it kind of like makes this curve, or like there's that middle ground where it's like, you know enough that you're like an advanced person, but you don't know, or you are also aware of how much you have to learn more.
Right.
I know enough that I don't really know anything.
Exactly.
Yeah. When people are like, dude, Sinan, you're a good climber, I'm like, not fucking really.
and
because I'm more aware that I suck.
Right.
And I think when you were saying earlier, like, you know, I tend to downplay a lot of things that I do, it's because one of those things is like I surround myself with people, or like my Instagram is just full of people that are just really good at whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like I get to see that and I'm like, okay, I'm not there.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like it's easy for me to be like, oh yeah, I mean, there's so much better out there and so much like more room to grow.
Right, but your bias blind spot is also not as high because there's people who are in the same position who expect to have the yacht. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're driving a Honda. Like, chill out, bruh. You know?
It's also like those people that like watch basketball and go, LeBron James, what a fucking bum. Yeah. Like, what? You think you can play basketball with LeBron James?
Yeah.
Like watching X Games or some shit and be like, yeah, if I tried, I could do that.
Yeah, like I skateboarded when I was 12, 46 now.
Yeah, so what the grammar thing revealed was like, again, so they give someone an actual paper to analyze and be like, okay, so you rated yourself on your grammar, we tested your grammar, like we can objectively look at that. You don't know the results yet. Now I want you to analyze this and catch all the grammar mistakes. Well, the people who were really poor at grammar caught significantly less mistakes than the people who are better at it.
Sure, it makes sense.
So the implication is you can't even be aware of how unaware you are because you are so like biased and unaware of your level of competence. So the more incompetent you are, the higher the likelihood that you're going to inflate your ability on things that you think you can do. So like I can use a computer mouse, right? So I believe that my ability to use a computer mouse is probably better than yours. But when we're talking about like something like juggling, which I can't juggle, I'm going to downplay that, you know, I can't juggle because I haven't practiced.
Right.
But you can't juggle because you dumb. You know? Right? So like it's just that interesting, it's super interesting how like people have that bias and that proclivity to enhance themselves. And
And then we get right back to that root question is how do you teach other people awareness, and can certain people be aware of their lack of awareness?
It's tough. And if we go back to the road, being on the road, we cannot give good feedback to other drivers.
Yeah.
The only feedback we can give is a horn.
And that's just a big fuck you.
Exactly.
See, I never really use my horn unless it's like to get out of a situation.
Right.
But like most of the time I'll just like flick a high beam.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? Like, I'll just let them know, like, hey, this is not the right choice to be making right here. I'm not mad at you about it. Just, like, heads up.
Yeah,
like,
be aware of what you're doing.
Yeah, like, don't come out of that corner on your phone. Like, I saw it. You know what you did wrong. Here's a high beam, just so you know.
Yeah.
Because then again, like, the horn is a little too aggressive. It's like, you know, the horn is like me saying, fuck you.
Yep.
But also high beams to some other people could be aggressive.
It could, but it's all...
The point is like that feedback that we have in cars is so limited in communication. It's so hard to understand the intentions and motivations behind people. People typically like to use their imagination to think about the worst possible reason why you're doing that.
They could. You could. But, I don't know.
We need like pre-recorded messages that you can like have next to your horn or something. Excuse me, sir, that was quite rude. Please analyze your behaviors and their effects on others. Thank you.
Yeah, or like a car that like a Tesla, right, speaks back to you. You merged without looking. You know, like you dumb fuck.
Like, not a good move on that one.
The boxing gloves pops out and hits you in the face.
Or just like airdrop a message to that person. Be like, not a good turn.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very hard. And not only that, but even if people are in the wrong, like, for example, there was this, I'll never forget this, and this happened other times, but this one was a little bit more visceral. It was in PB in Pacific Beach, and my wife is driving, and we're going down Garnett, which is like the main strip, and this woman was kind of just going to run the stop sign, and we were going to smack right into her. And my wife was like laying on the horn to be like, no, 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 like we cannot stop. This chick stops and then flips us off. So like,
yeah, people suck.
Yeah, it goes back to this, like, the feedback is reduced, so we can't give appropriate feedback. And then the interpretation of that feedback is gone through a bunch of filters, and then the reaction is...
Right.
So it's really hard. How do you help people create awareness? And I think if we use the car example, is that it's really difficult.
Yeah.
And then if it's difficult there, even when we're communicating with other people, it's very difficult. So how do you do it? It's hard, man.
Yeah.
How do you keep your cool in a confrontation and help someone snap out and just become more aware of what they're doing?
Yeah, just more.
It's an open-ended conversation.
Yeah. It's how do you increase communication in places where you don't have really the opportunity to communicate, like driving.
Yeah. Got
the horn. When you put like motivational messages on billboards, or like be considerate. You got the ones for drunk driving, you know, be considerate or something, or don't drive drunk or whatever. You just have I was at Mesa Rim a long time ago, and there was this group class that was happening. They have group classes there, right? And then they take up a lot of space in the gym. Well, there's this guy who's deadlifting. There's a lot of spots that you can go deadlift, but the group needed this one space, and this is sponsored by the company. Well, the dude was like throwing up, like he was just like deadlifting, slamming it down, and it's like close to other people. It's like you just don't do that in general. And the workout instructor was like, she's more timid, friendly, didn't want to confront. They're just like, oh, what? Everyone's like uncomfortable. I'm an assertive person, so I'm like, hey man, do you mind just taking a few steps back so that we can have this class? And he was like immediately hostile about it. Like, I guess something happened where we infringed on his space, so he felt like we were in the wrong. It escalated, and I asked him the question. I was like, hey man, there's 9 of us here who are trying to work out, and we're looking at you like you're not accommodating or helping us do this. What do you think about that? And he couldn't, he just, fuck you guys, blah, blah, blah. And at that point, it's like, okay, this isn't going anywhere. So I went to the staff, and I was like, hey, there's this guy, he's interrupting this group workout. We're trying to have a workout. Can you help us out? They talk to him for like 20 minutes. He's arguing with them.
Meanwhile, it's an hour workout with this group. We're 30 minutes in now. Mm-hmm. So the guy never became aware or could figure out how to reduce the conflict. But the consequence was, I just took 20 minutes out of your fucking workout.
Yeah.
So I wonder, are there non-confrontational ways, or at least for you guys to think about, because I think we're kind of wrapping up. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah.
Could you find non-confrontational ways to still get what you want, but also not allow that person to get what they want because in some way they chose not to work with you? But can you do that in a way that limits them or hamstrings them? Because you don't want to reward that kind of behavior. You don't want to be another thing that says your reaction to this got you what you wanted.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure he still thought he was in the right after that conversation, unaware that we totally interrupted your workout.
Right. He's still right. He still thinks he's right, but at least there was a consequence that maybe he'll avoid in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I'll leave you guys with that. Like, how can you do that in a creative way in the moment when shit's hot?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, too, something that we talked about earlier is like I would probably just find ways to like just circumvent that whole situation to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So like, as a staff member, if I know that space is limited and I'm gonna have a workout class there, just say, hey, this section of the gym is closed from time. Yeah. You know, I don't know about how to do it in the moment. That's a little tougher. Because in the moment, then that's when it's just like, cool, you got to move.
Yeah.
And
that's another thing I tell people is like proactively do this, because by the time it happens, you don't want to rely on your skill set to navigate it. It's so much easier to be proactive. I agree with you. I mean, the instructor could have just like gone around and started telling people, hey, we're going to have a workout here, just so you know, about 10 minutes.
Yeah. And even as a timid instructor, like if I was a timid instructor, like that would just be like helping me out, because then later on I don't have to deal with the anxiety of like, oh shit, this person's still here. Like I said, hey, I gave you a heads up. We're going to start now, and this is as much space as we need.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's easy to say that you would be proactive.
It is.
But
Shit happens, though.
It's hard to be proactive.
Shit happens.
So. Yeah, in that example, I mean, it really should have been on the management to get in there first, like proactiveness, because they relied on you, and then he felt that it was me versus Sanan rather than me versus Grotto or wherever it was, the company itself. I mean, you don't have any authority in that situation, so it's just one man versus another man.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot easier than fighting an entire group.
Right.
Or like in that way, like a societal expectation, right? Because then there is an expectation of like from 6 to 8, you can't be in this space unless you're doing this class.
Right. So leveraging, that's why I like to leverage other perceptions, or I call it for the class I'll do is leverage the institution.
Yeah, okay.
There's multiple layers. You can leverage other people, or you can leverage the institution.
What if the institution is systemically racist, man? What are we going to do now?
Okay, I'm not talking about that institution. That's hilarious.
Maybe Mesa Rim is discriminant to us who deadlift.
You gotta tear it down, man. Start from the beginning.
Yeah.
I hate deadlift.
Mesa Rim has to do better.
Yeah.
Mesa Rim.
I'm just kidding. I love Mesa Rim. In case anyone from Mesa Rim ever hears this.
All right, guys. I'm hungry, man. I need to eat.
Yeah.
This was a good conversation.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. Good shit. All right, man. Let's wrap it up.
Take it easy.
I hope that turned out with that microphone. I'm not sure if it
Can you hear me on there?
Yeah, but it's not as clear. It's like
oh, okay.
I just need to buy another like lavalier.